Right, you're watching Luck on Sunday, and in the company of Emmett Kennedy and Jamie Snowden, here are these week's Super 7 talking points. Right, here we go. We'll start with Kautoland. Now, Paul Nicholls referenced this earlier. Kautoland was not raised by the handicapper for being forced off the course when in with a chance of winning at the final fence on his previous start, so he was able to run off his old mark. By contrast, Slate House, who was a faller in the Bet Victor Gold Cup, 2 fences from home, fully 2 fences from home, was given a hike in the ratings this week because of that. Why is that fair, Jamie?
I think ultimately it's not fair, but I would be a fan of not putting the horse up for falling. I wouldn't, if I was the handicap, I wouldn't have put Slate House up. I wouldn't have put Kautoland up and let him have the opportunity to do what he could have done. But I think Slate House going up for falling 2 out was harsh. I personally think that handicappers shouldn't stop horses from winning. They should be penalising them having won and making it harder for them to win again. So I think I would be in favour of Kautoland not going up, and likewise I would be in favour of Slate House not going up.
Emmett?
They seem to be very inconsistent, the BHA. It's almost like they make it up as they go along. I remember Phil Smith justifying Don Poley when that whole thing blew up, when Michael Leary took all of his horses out of the Grand National on protest in that year, justifying Don Poley's top weight by rating him through Manila Rocco, who fell at the last. That didn't seem to make sense. Neither of these make sense. It doesn't make sense that you're not going to put up a horse who is very unlucky in running and is taken out and then subsequently thrashes that horse. But it's 2 fences to go. How can you possibly raise Slate House? It's almost like sometimes...
I don't have a problem with them raising horses when they fall. But you see, I'm not looking at it from Jamie's point of view because he's looking at it from protecting his owners, and I understand that. But the handicapper has to assess the horses on their merits and try and make it as fair for the next race as possible. He's not there to provide restorative justice. He's there to give them a mark. Happened?
You can't. The handicapper...
He would either have won or he'd have been a very close second, Slate House. You can say that with fair certainty.
Can you?
Yes, I think so.
I think
and in the case of Kautoland, that should have gone up. I mean, Paul's right. He would have won with £6 more on his back anyway.
I think the handicapper has to handicap on what has happened, not what might happen.
I think the handicapper has to take as clear a view of what might have happened as he can. I mean, Racing Post will give a Racing Post rating. So anyway, the bell is gone. The bell is gone. The bell's beaten us. Is the bell broken? The bell's completely broken.
If the bell is broken, I'll just say that if Young Master could be winning a race that he wasn't eligible to run in and then be hiked up by the handicapper and still go and win, that seemed very unfair to me because the horse, it should have been the BHA intervening and saying, you're not eligible to run in this race, therefore you're out. Yet he got a massive hike. And here we've got 2 instances where they've gone, we won't put you up, but we will put you up.
Right, apparently the bell's back. Now, you can hear it, we can't. But the bell apparently is back. Right, good, that was a good start, wasn't it? Excellent. Right, dear oh dear. Race times. We've talked about this a little bit earlier in the series. Ruby Walsh suggesting staggered race times to make sure races don't clash. And also whether we can have a bigger gap around a day's feature races to allow all platforms to show that feature race without clashes or interruptions. What do you say to that, Jamie?
Well, I think what does infuriate people is when there are split screens on various racing channels, and that does infuriate people. So it's not an easy. There's not an easy solution to the problem. I like Ruby's idea of perhaps shortening the time between races, making it 25 minutes as opposed to half an hour. I think that is possible, but it's one of these things you're probably going to have to trial to see whether it works first. I don't know of a simple solution.
I was in Bahrain this week. Now, they're just an emerging horse racing nation. They can get every horse round the paddock in race card order. They can get every race to time off with 25-minute gaps. But in Ireland or England, it seems to be beyond us. Surely it would be better for turnover, for interest, for keeping people's gnat-like attention spans going.
But it's 2019. The idea that split screens are still a thing, and it's not the fault of it needs to be pointed out, it's not the fault of the broadcaster. It falls on their shoulders. But it's not their fault. It's because the authorities aren't punishing the tracks. for making sure that the races go off on time. And if you look at the Breeders' Cup on time, French racing can sometimes be a little bit self-indulgent. But Meydan, Dubai, always on time. Why can you not just learn from these jurisdictions? I mean, you broadcast in these jurisdictions. Why are they not able to learn from them?
Well, consistency of the track is one thing. So the configuration of the tracks around the world makes it easier to get horses in the paddock, out of the paddock, and onto the track and down, and they're ponied down and into the gate and out. Whereas here in Ireland it's harder because of the lack of uniformity in the way that the geography and topography of these places.
And there are some times that you can't do it. You know, if a girth doesn't fit and you've got to go back and grab a girth, the horse is linked to the paddock. You know, I was at Cheltenham the other day and the French horse didn't have cheek pieces on in the paddock. And there are things that sometimes it does happen. Would racing have been beneficial if that horse had been withdrawn and taken out of the race and fined because of it? I don't know.
The bell is back. There we are. 2 minutes is up. Let's talk a little about diversity. Simon Holt, very good guest column in the Racing Post this week, saying yes, measures are being put in place by the BHA to make the makeup of the crowd more diverse and to attract more people from different backgrounds into the sport of horse racing, but he didn't really see that it was cutting through significantly in spite of the initiatives that were being made. It's something we've discussed plenty on this programme, so 3 white middle-aged men can talk about it again for 2 minutes, Emmett.
Yeah, we're perfectly suited to have this conversation. Through presenting the Final Furlong podcast, I've been lucky enough to host Cheltenham preview nights and be at various race days. It's a fallacy to think that there are not young people who are huge fans of racing. There are. And there's a significant amount of young people, middle-aged, whatever, who listen to the Final Furlong podcast. And because of that, I've met at the Dublin Racing Festival and said the only reason they were there is because they'd heard the crack we were having on the show and talking about it, and they came over. And it's all different genders, all different races. So there are fans. What might be a problem is the expense of going racing. It's a very, very costly day out to go racing. And maybe the BHA and Horse Racing Ireland need to do a little bit more to incentivise people to come racing, because you were there on Irish Champions Weekend on the Sunday at the Curragh. It was fantastic. It was the best that the Curragh have done, but they still only got under 11,000. And the vast majority of the people who were there to support Pat Smullen because he's such a great man. So that was one of the biggest race days of the year, and they couldn't get near their attendance levels. It's up to the authorities of racing to promote the sport better. And I think we as broadcasters have done, and trainers, we've done all we can. Now it's the job of the authorities to do what they can to take the baton and promote the sport as best as possible.
Jamie?
Well, I think we're doing quite well, actually. I think girls in racing are flying. I mean,
Holly Doyle with 100 winners this week.
Holly Doyle with 100 winners. Paige Fuller, our conditional. I think she's 6th in the table at the moment. Bryony Frost. I think girls are doing very well. I think we're you know, a lot of flat trainers and owners, you know, might come from different races and what have you. And I think sometimes we need to sit back and go, actually, we're doing quite well.
Or at least we're moving in. I think it's progress, isn't it?
Yeah.
If progress is being made, even from a low base, that's a good thing. What's bad is if you're regressing or you're not widening the net or making an attempt to widen the net.
And I think we're trying and we're moving forward, but I think at some point we have to say, actually, what we're doing seems to be working.
And there's certainly been some notable successes in that regard this year. And later in the season, the Supremo of the Diversity in Racing Steering Group, Rose Grissell, is going to join us on the programme. I think that's the 15th of December. Rose is coming on, so looking forward to welcoming her and talking about some of the initiatives that she's been putting in place. As we move on and talk once again about syndicates. Now, this rumbling Ken Boy story goes on, but it has several different layers and several different chapters, Emmett. The point was made by Alan Sweetman this week, writing in the trade paper, The Racing Post. Has Horse Racing Ireland done enough both prior to the Supreme Racing Syndicate falling apart and post?
So I've had a lot of contact with members of Supreme Racing for quite some time, and it's been very clear that something wasn't right. It's been very clear that something was not correct. People who brought it up were either kicked out of the club or were abused verbally, and this was all reported to the HRI. I would say that in the end, the action they took was very, very strong. They gave Supreme Racing every single opportunity to right this wrong. They gave them every opportunity to prove that there was no wrongdoing, and the silence was deafening, and the silence spoke everything that you needed to know. How this happened in the first place is shameful on both ends, not just on theirs, but I think also on the governing bodies. I would say to anybody who is looking at becoming involved in a syndicate now, this is probably the best time to do it, because there's going to be so much scrutiny on syndicates, and they themselves will be keeping such a stringent eye on themselves that no one's going to dare put a pound out of place. Everybody will be making sure that everything's done right. But this might have only come to light because of Ken Boy's success and prize money not being given out and owners meeting each other and realising, hold on, you've got 60%, you've got 20%. I like what they've done. I like the fact that they've voided them, and I hope that that means that these people are never involved again. I also hope that for the members themselves, and these are syndicate owners, they own the horses, that they get their horses back to the track sooner rather than later.
So he's left you kindly with 15 seconds. Should the BHA and the HRI institute regulation, essentially, on all syndicates?
Ultimately, they should, yes. But I do think that it's worth noting that the vast majority of syndicates are run brilliantly. You know, we've got several syndicates in our yard, and they're run really professionally, and I think they're wonderful for people to get involved in. So yes, the BHA should look into it, but I think they are the exception rather than the rule to syndicates.
Yeah, and there is no doubt that Foxtrot Racing, I'm sure, is an excellent syndicate. And a couple of their members were filming their horses on the racecourse last week, and they got a gentle rap over the knuckles from our bosses here at Racecourse Media Group for doing so. And there was a little bit of a storm blew up on social media with people saying it's ridiculously protectionist policy and people need to be out there promoting the sport, and if they're doing that by taking pictures of their horse at the races on Twitter, then so be it. I've been speaking to people in a head office this week, Seb Vance, our Director of Communications and Public Relations, and I sort of put this to him, and he was saying, well, it's fine. Anybody's entitled to go and film their horse on the course and put it on Twitter, but not if it's being done in the guise of a commercial operation, so i.e. promoting that individual syndicate, because that individual syndicate is trying to compete against another. And if they are using footage that they are not licensed to use, or rights footage, and Racecourse Media Group have the rights to that, in a commercial capacity, then that's where there is an issue that comes, because they're trying to protect the commercial position of the network broadcaster and others who have those rights. So that's the position of Racecourse Media Group. So it's a somewhat more nuanced debate than perhaps was put out in the newspapers this week.
Yeah, I think it was very badly reported. I don't think you've just summed it up succinctly and brilliantly. And when you consider the vast amounts of money that are involved are in attaining the rights and acquiring the rights for horse racing, you're going to become pretty frustrated if somebody has just got their iPhone out and filmed a race or done something for financial gain, whether that's interviewing people when they're not given permission, whether it's filming the racehorses entering the paddock or filming the finish of a race. There are huge media rights involved, and there are three big players. I can completely see why they want to be protected. You can take a photograph of yourself at the races. You can take a photograph of your horse at the races. No one's saying anything about that. But it's akin to accessing a broadcasting network through a dodgy stream. And I think that's pretty fair.
However, in this case, quite understandably, the syndicate member saying, well, we're just taking a video of our horse. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I would agree there's nothing wrong with that, James. So there's probably there's probably a common sense way of just bringing these parties together and just making people aware of the regulations.
And I don't know the exact details. I haven't spoken to Dan about it, but I think just from reading it in the paper, I think actually, as you said, it was a gentle rap over the knuckles, and Dan sort of put his hands up and said, "Okay, fine, sorry, we'll take it down." So I think it's a little bit of a storm in the teacup, perhaps.
But it's one of those things that always gets people exercised as to how much you can film and then put out.
Yeah.
But it's
people like to get worked up about these things.
Well, they do, because it's fundamentally a smallish story that you can make into a big one, because it involves big, powerful company and a guy who owns a tiny bit of a racehorse.
But in saying that, though, you could easily film a video at the yard celebrating the success. You don't have to necessarily use the footage from the racecourse, and if you want to use it from the racecourse, ask for permission.
So there you are. That was filming on course this week. The Liberal Democrats, well, they're unlikely, I would suggest, to be occupying the corridors of power after the election, but frankly, we live in times where you have to say who knows. But the important thing is that in their manifesto, they have called for an independent regulator on horse racing. Now, this is something that the BHA have been pushing back hard against with the creation, helping to create racing's own independent regulator, so the one that they've put in place. Now, the Liberal Democrats similar to the Labour manifesto, have called for racing to be stripped of its own authority in terms of the welfare, regulating the welfare of horses. Now, I think a significant point is here, Jamie, that if another major political party feel that they can win votes by using the animal welfare hook, then increasingly racing and other sports have to be quite worried about this.
It's very scary, isn't it? And for political parties to be using this in their manifesto is very scary, because the BHA do a wonderful job, and as we know, horse welfare in racing is paramount, and what we do as trainers and people who look after the horses and the racecourses, what they do to look after the animal welfare is wonderful. And I think we somehow need to be shouting from the rooftops that actually we all, as an industry, do such a brilliant job in looking after these horses, who are they have physios, they have chiropractors, they have everything all in on site looking after them, and people who get up at the crack of dawn looking after them, feeding them, keeping them warm, mucking them out, and everything. The whole part of it, all the way through to the racecourse. So I think for the fact that the political parties to be bringing this up in the manifesto is worrying, and God help it if they got into power.
We can start packing it up if this actually comes to fruition. Racing is under threat from outside forces. The whole subject of the whip, which I was a little bit disappointed that Dr. Richard Newland on this show 2 weeks ago said, we had this conversation a year ago, we're probably just going to have to do away with it. You give up the whip and you can say goodbye to racing, because it's the opening door.
But stay on point.
I'll stay on point, but essentially, the long-term game for these people, for these outside forces, and we all know who they are, so I'm not going to give them the airtime, is the banning of racing. They just want to end it. Some of these have a policy that you should have no interaction with animals at all. Some of them, their manifesto is people shouldn't have pets. You cannot listen to these people seriously, particularly when, in all seriousness, there is a homelessness crisis in the UK and Ireland, and you look at horse racing. Horses are treated like kings and queens, like the horses at Jamie's Yard are looked after first class. Horses in Ireland the same way. They're treated better than some humans. It's an abomination that this has been talked about.
I felt we went slightly off topic there, but I'm in sympathy with much of what you said, and I noted that Jamie Snowden had his 36th winner of the season, because I looked it up on the Racing Post how many winners he'd had in the last 10 years, and realised that the Banner King Rebel yesterday had tipped him to 36, which was his highest seasonal total already. But there was nothing that triggered anything here at Racing TV or anywhere in the Racing Post or anywhere on a central database telling us that had necessarily happened. And again, it brought me around, Jamie, to the idea that we're not using the data that we have in racing in a particularly engaging way across all media platforms. I hold my hands up and say I think we're as responsible for it as anybody, but there must be a better way of getting good information out there to people, and pertinent and interesting information out there.
I suppose this is more in your line of work than my line of work. I suppose you've got to go and look for it, haven't you? Which is your point. If it flashes up somewhere that that was our the winner that took us into our seasonal best, would be wonderful for all of you, and I suppose it would
be good for you.
It would be great for us, because you could broadcast it. I hadn't thought of it until you mentioned it this morning.
The other point, that Mark Johnston went past Martin Pipe's all-time record for winners in the season this week, but it rather slipped under the radar.
Yep.
And it strikes me that anything with numbers, we're always a bit late. We're just not for a sport that is relying on data, we're not very numerate.
Well, we've got access to more data than ever before, and in multiple different sources, which is fantastic. But you're 100% right. For some reason, it isn't being utilised to promote the sport in the proper way. There are things like Sir Michael Stout breaking the record for winners at Royal Ascot. That everyone knows that was about to come. It was just a matter of when he would do it. But for Sir Mark Johnston to do that, for your most successful season to have occurred already, these are things that, again, I think the governing bodies of racing on both sides of the Irish water need to really look at. And I know that they are doing the best they can in terms of social media, but they need to look at these things a little bit more and then fully promote them. And it's probably our responsibility as well.
And there is a resource now, but it's buried deep in the BHA website. There is a resource where you can see career winners for trainers, but I think it only goes back so far.
Yeah.
So, but because there are a few inherent inaccuracies within it, they're not that keen to push it, but at least they're getting somewhere. But I think we all need to make a collaborative effort. Maybe there needs to be a sort of data group get together. And
yeah, I think a data group would be or some kind of a group that correlates all this data would be fantastic. But it has to be said that on most occasions we're missing out on some big stories.
Right, and stories of what spells sell the sport, of course. And those were this week's talking points.
Luck on Sunday, proudly sponsored by Al Basti Equiworld Dubai.